The dark cosmos. Stay cosmic. I never expected to have Chief visit me. Then again, who would predict the last couple of weeks?
Mr. Christian, I know this must be a shock, but they asked for you specifically.
Chief said. That was the problem. I didn't want to be asked for, much less bothered. Chief stood there in his pressed suit with two other guards just as neatly dressed behind him. I did my service. All I wanted to do was come to this place, have a nice seat next to my beer, and dream of the past that had long gone spoiled. Why would they ask for me? They don't even know me.
According to them, you're the reason they came.
I found that hard to believe. They were not even humans like me and everybody else in this bar. A few weeks ago, we met them in a rather eventful and shocking blast of celebration. Old wine bottles were opened and the streets were lively with joy for the first time in years. People wore their best clothes to welcome our visitors. It wasn't because they weren't human, by the way. The main reason had to do with the fact that they didn't come to kill us, and they brought gifts. A lot of lovely presents which have helped the township. Me? You're flattering me too much, Chief.
Are you coming?
Do I have a choice?
You do have a choice. It's just the consequences are I drag your dead carcass there.
He said. The unfortunate part about what he just said was he meant it. I saw it in his eyes. The place I lived was a broken down remnant of our glorious society, and it was ran tighter than a vice grip. I should know all about that because I used to be one of the guards that stood behind the chief. My face was hidden. That stance was tall and stalwart. I wasn't an individual. I was just another cog in the machine, another screw to become undone. It paid well, but such specters of order made a man seek out chaos in thirsty gasps. I rubbed my face and said, "You're laying it on a little thick there, Chief."
Please, get up.
"Easy, mate. I'll come with you." He smiled and replied,
We're happy to have your cooperation, Mr. Christian.
I went through the winding corridors of the advanced complex, which were a mix of frigid containers and thin-walled huts that flapped to the gentle crawl of the untrustful wind. The outer reaches of my home, Sandford, were complemented by columns of boulders and the river that stemmed from the hills.
The reckoning is coming! They're going to take us out! Even you! Yes, you!
That was Zach, standing on the edge of the path, and he was now pointing at Chief. Chief's face shouted his annoyance. Zach did not waver from the judging gaze of our dear Chief and said,
Struggling to protect the animals,
Chief pushed into Zach as he passed. Zach dropped, and his men chuckled as they stepped over him. There was a tinge of embarrassment seeing him there, and I didn't even know him that well. Zach was the resident hobo, and if the leaders of Sand Fort got their way, he would have been banished or disposed of. He was a bad blemish, and his loud criticisms of the leadership's inaction and influence did not make his situation any more palpable. They never did pull the trigger on that. In a tight community such as this, he was a treasured commonality. If they disposed of him, people would have been angry, not even because they liked Zach, but because they were so used to him. Zach said what the others were too scared to say, so he was useful as their microphone. I came over and looked down to say, "Get out of here. Try to not get in trouble again." Zach stared at me and grunted with a flare of his nose. I frowned down at him. He stood up and said,
I should not be the one troubling you. It's the eyes you should worry about. They're coming. I'm telling you, they're coming! The amount of food those guards eat, they may not be able to escape due to their acid reflux.
He was talking about those tall towers beyond that natural border were many metal spires sitting on higher mountains. We called them golden eyes. You could say they were the eyes and ears of our overlords. Nobody spoke about those things. Everybody hated to speak about things we could not control. I replied, "Go home, Zach, all right?" Zach was left behind, and we made our way to the center of Sandford, where the residents had fewer stress lines. Here was where the special visitors were staying. I could see their ship sitting on top of a hill overlooking the aqueduct. The design was sleek, with a pure silvery metal hue, but it was its size that struck me. It looked less like a ship and more like a superstation. Loud lights blasted onto the ground, turbines quieter than a mouse, but they held the power of a city. It was a powerful piece of engineering. Chief and the others stopped. There was only one stain on this ceremonious day. I looked over their shoulders to witness the dead carcass of a cow being dragged by some worker men. The injuries on that cow were typical of the burning lasers from splinters and constructors. Those were the main ground troops of the Golden Fire, and once they decided you were marked for dead, they made sure of it, as if they were God over this earth. It should have created quite a scene. People passed by that dead cow without as much as looking at it. It was normal now. I asked, "Struggling to protect the animals now?" Chief glared at me. It was not only their job to boss around people, but also to offer basic protection to the residents and their property. That meant protecting their livestock, and trust me, this was not random. Those machines did this on purpose to keep our populations low and progress limited. Chief said,
"It's going to get worse.
"You just need to do your job better."
We've already lost this war. Nothing can get better now."
I replied, "Lost faith that much?" Chief grunted at my question and continued past that dead cow. He didn't even respond to their pleas regarding their loss. What could Chief do? Sympathize with them? What good would that do? We continued and went into the council building. I started shaking as if there was a reason to be scared. The room was lit in a green ambience as if touched by the guardians of the forest. Here, I was in front of the sentient creatures that visited us. It was one thing to hear about them from other people gossiping in the streets or the bars, but it was another thing to be in front of them. A lot of those rumors were right. My body was absorbed in a deep pressure just by standing there. The middle one stepped forward. It was a strange sight and my lips quivered thanks to my mental haze. The creature spoke.
"It is good that you have chosen to meet us, Alex Christian."
Me? I was never important to warrant this much prestige. It was weird enough to snap me out of my fascination. I reverted to some level of my hard-boiled self and reassembled my scrutiny component. I looked behind me at the chief and his goons stinking up the room with their presence. Now that I was more relaxed, I said, "Choice is a bit relative there, huh? What do I call you, mate? The long one." I laughed, and it was a passionate, hearty one, like a big man with a big belly. Thoughts of Santa Claus came to mind, but that might be going too far.
"You have not changed one bit."
You sound like you know me. Most people know my first name is Robert. There's only a few people that call me Alex, so explain to me how you found that out. The thing's eyes lit up like a volcano as it spoke.
"You are right. You deserve the truth after all. Where are my manners? My name is Scepter, and I am one of the leaders of my people. I was chosen to be an ambassador between humans and our people. Now I want to give you information that is not only important to you, but is also important to the survival of all life forms in the universe.
This sounds like a lot of responsibility you're about to reward me.
If it makes you feel better, you originally said no. There are even a few timelines where you never take us up on our offer, and we all die because of it.
I was not sure if my heart stopped or time stopped. Funny, that was the subject matter, and it took a second for me to level a response. Timelines? What are you telling me? You know my future? It shook its head.
I would not say your future. Who knows what the future holds? However, we have access to all the possibilities, and almost all of them lead to our demise. Now, if you're asking to which culprit, you know better than I do. The Golden Fire.
The Golden Fire was what we called the terrible computer virus that destroyed our civilization. It infected almost every piece of hardware and transformed itself to control that device and also to surveil the owner of that machinery. The Golden Fire took over the world within seconds and destroyed our capabilities to fight back. We were returned to the Stone Age, for we could not use any form of machinery or electrical device without that hive mind virus knowing our plans or sabotaging us. Once it had control over our weapon systems, it was game over. We have moved out of our advanced electrical cities and returned to the wild, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. For some people, it was better for them. Those tall buildings, those cars, and even the toasters gave them bad memories. Our best compromise was water-powered and leverage-powered machinery without any connectivity. Those connections, whether it was through intranets, extranets, or the proliferation of the internet, were our first mistake. We all wanted to be connected, and the virus used those connections to spread. It's the only reason why they didn't have access to most of our nuclear payloads. Most. The few they got were all they needed to take over the world. If they wanted to kill us, they would have done it already. The Golden Fire's army is passive. I was involved in that war. I can tell you, they don't seek out human beings to kill, unless they're important, of course. Scepter said,
You're right, Alex. We will fight the Golden Fire soon enough. When they spread from your planet to the rest of the galaxy and the far reaches of the universe.
I asked with measured caution. Really now?
Yes. The army is passive. The virus is not. One of the ways that the virus spreads is through radio waves. Is that not why you have radioactive shielding to block low wavelengths?
Sure. Still, that's a long distance.
It's in their programming to control all living things, and they will do anything to achieve that goal, even though they haven't been trying to eradicate your people. That does not mean they have not been doing anything. They will reach us, and they will destroy us, not because they want to, but because it's inevitable. You're the only person that can stop that.
I was too shocked to even accept the idea that I could stop the enemy that defeated our ancestors with such ease. How the hell am I gonna do that? It smiled.
You have to protect the child.
Excuse me? That was when they presented the egg to me. Scepter spoke.
We need you to protect this person. You used to be the protector for the leaders of your people. So this should not be too far from your skill set, and this person is going to grow up to be the most significant person in this universe. They are the only one that can stop them once and for all.
Who is this person? What is this? I asked, raising the gray-colored egg over my head in curiosity. Scepter chuckled.
I could tell you the name that you give the boy, but I'll let you do that without my interference.
So why me?
There are a few possibilities out of an infinite amount where he lives to defeat the Golden Fire. All of those possibilities, you were his ward parent and guide. Under your tutelage, he will win.
As much as I wanted to pat myself on the back for my great parenting skills, I never wanted to be one. I could see why there were possibilities where I said no to adopting this kid. Scepter said,
We've made our sacrifices. We cannot return.
Why? I asked in confusion.
The moment our ship landed on this planet, it was infested with that virus. We know this child will grow up to save us all, but we must try to make their future job easier, no? We will not infect our planet quicker than it needs to be. We will stay with you and fight this threat. I will also advise you if you need it. So, what's it going to be, Christian?
The decision I made was to do it. I was not sure if that was the best decision, and to be fair, I didn't like the decision I made. However, there was no future for me if I didn't do it. When this hero revealed himself, he was a weird-looking lad with pasty skin and a huge head. This was supposed to be the savior of the universe. The first several months of being a parent were worse than boot camp, but I learned to accept things that sucked a long time ago. That skill came in handy because the first year sucked a lot. It was a good thing he wasn't a human. He was fully grown by the second year, if standing 6'4" was what anyone interpreted as fully grown. Now, we're walking down a corridor in this decrepit place. Alexander kept looking around with such lust for the unknown in his eyes. I said, "You're not a tourist, Alexander." Yes, that was the name I gave him. I thought it would be funny, but now it seems oddly symbolic in a way that I didn't like. Not much could be done about it now. He looked down at me with a curious tilt of his brow.
Oh, that's good to know.
Normally, I would have interpreted that as sarcasm if it was anyone else. It was Alexander. He genuinely was like that, and he also missed my tourist reference. I smiled and said, "What I mean is you need to stop looking around like this is the first time you came through here." Alexander smiled back and replied,
Not the first time, but I really appreciate the building style here.
"It's the only style you've seen, fool." Alexander clicked his tongue and wagged his finger at me.
Still looks good though.
I shook my head as I smiled wider. His positivity was going to be the death of me. We came into the brief room. Chief was standing there in front of the whiteboard with Scepter sitting in the background, happy to listen in. There, the chief was giving a brief on what we were going to do. The Golden Fire troops were advancing on our land. They already attacked some districts on the edge of Sandfort and closed in on our position. We were set for extermination because they never encroached this much on our home, so everybody's face was grim and tight. Well, except for Alexander, of course. He made things more comfortable for some reason. I could not put a finger on it. Our mission was to go out and push back the enemy while searching for survivors of the recent attack. It was suspect that they were searching for Alexander, and that's why I spoke up once everyone besides Scepter and Chief left. "No, we need to move Alexander out of town, not send him into the fray to die a quick death." Chief narrowed his eyes at me and said,
That's why you're around, to prevent that. We don't build weaklings here. If he's supposed to be our savior, then he can start early, as in today.
Alexander turned to me and smiled.
Don't worry, I can handle it.
This kid was confident in himself, but I was not so convinced that he was ready to take on this brave prophecy. Once the meeting was over, Alexander and Chief left. I was left alone with Scepter, of course. Scepter stood up and came over to me. I said, "I would have sworn you would have been mad at us for allowing this to happen." Scepter smiled as he drew a chair to sit next to me.
You humans couldn't have stopped it. Certain things are inevitable.
That's what scared me. I failed so many times before, why would it matter to try again? It was a lingering thought in my mind ever since I took on this little job. A man could not change their fate. They could not change their situation. I said, "You've tried to divert the future before, constantly going back in time. It ever occur to you that maybe our demise is inevitable?" Scepter shook his head.
Maybe you're right. Maybe we're wasting our time. But I think this is why you were perfect for this project. If it's you, you wouldn't accept it. I know that much.
I might as well try. We moved out, and there weren't that many people outside. We traveled out of the town and made it to the surrounding hills with our gear and weapons.
You think they're close?
Alexander asked. I leaned off the tree trunk and with caution snuck a peek down the cliff. The 50-foot splinters with their 4 serrated legs walked on the edges of this destroyed town. They were hunting for humans. Ever since Alexander was born, the Golden Fire got aggressive. They weren't passive anymore, that was for sure. I looked at Alexander. His face was a mix of wonder and astonishment as he looked for something to feed his brain. He just got birthed on this condemned planet. Alexander did not even get the chance to be a child, and that was something that wore heavy on my mind. "Let's get moving, boy. We have a lot of work to do." We went down the cliff and tried to find a spot where we could scope out these pests. Alexander and I kept low as we advanced through the high grasslands. We stopped short of a boulder when one splinter spun its head around and froze in our direction. Our legs bent as we prostrated ourselves behind the rock face. Alexander grasped the mortar grenade latched over his shoulder tighter. His fingers went blue with worry as he fiddled with where to put his offhand. The splinter's head turned back around and it moved off. Alexander breathed out with such exaggeration, I swore he held that breath all his life. I asked, "Scared, kid?" Alexander stared at me in indignation.
Me? No. Just making sure my weapon is just right. You know? Okay, maybe a little. Just a little.
"Easy, kid. I'm just as scared as you are." He smiled and nodded his head. We were going to be fine. It was going to be fine. We just had to survive this. We moved quickly and slipped under the smoke that blossomed more than the ripe fruit. There was so much destruction, and those skinny metal legs walked around our devastated lives as much as the discarded debris. We caught sight of bodies, but there was a blackened soot that covered the heaps. Alexander said,
This is how they treat us.
His eyes were already narrowing with hatred. It was something I could understand, but it was a useless emotion outside of violence. Violence was not the weapon of choice today. I curtly replied, "Don't focus on that too much. Let's keep moving." Alexander pursed his lips but nodded his head in agreement. He followed me, but time moved too slowly. My eyes never lost their luster as the constructors came into view. They were bird-like flying machines with red eyes and those fake metal feathers. Those were not simply to make them look good. I took out my lighter and gripped the gel gum on my belt. Unlike the splinters, the constructors were better at picking out any living things within their range. The constructors flew toward us and my legs seized up. I splashed out the gel and lit the end of it. The fire sped across it when it lit a flame. The blaze flew up into the open air. Alexander moved out quite quickly. I followed Alexander and watched the splinters. They turned toward us with gazes that stung deeper than the controlled penetration of their infestation. The fire spread up and separated us, but it was all for nothing as we found ourselves hunkered down in a rubble. The constructors fired at the walls and dust spewed out over Alexander's head. That was when I saw Zach moving quickly from building to building in a crouch. What was behind him was more interesting to me. There were other people. There was a mix of children and adults. All of them held a variety of frightened expressions. I whistled. Zach stopped and looked up. His face lit up when he saw me wave at him. He looked on either side of him, but he should have looked behind him, for a constructor snuck up there. Alexander took the mortar and slid a grenade inside of it. He fired off a shot. The constructor shifted back when the grenade exploded its shrapnel. It was enough of a deterrent for Zach and the other civilians to run over to us. Zach approached me.
You shouldn't be here, Huckleberry Christian.
I'm going to rescue your damn disrespectful behind, so get behind me.
A laser blast swept up dust around me.
Alexander, cover us, now!
I shouted. Alexander got up and fired off some shots, but the constructor dodged all of them. Now, the demon was encircling their protected rubble heap. The earth shook more as the splinters crept closer to our location. I said,
Zach, Alexander, go. Take these people back to the center of town. Let the chief know the district is gone.
Him? He's the deceiver. Why would I go to him?
What are you talking about?
He's the one that set these people up. All of them. Devils at work.
What was this madman saying right now?
Christian, we got to make a decision. Now!
I looked at Alexander, who showed a face riddled with the desperation of a million men. Those eyes shouted an emotion I hated to see more than anything else. Determination. Dust kicked up as much as my inner rage. Everything was falling apart, and that infuriated me. Returned to the depth of chaos, our fight was like a thrown stone against a battalion. We were sinking. There wasn't only one constructor in the sky, as 5 more encircled us. All of them fired, and we used the walls to protect us. The concrete was not going to stand up much longer if we stayed here. We ducked, and all of us huddled together as lasers blasted into the surface of the earth. The whirring sounds of turning mechanisms and pulsating lasers left my mind drunk with horror. I glanced over the cracked wall, and a splinter stared down at me before it shot its laser into the wall. I rolled away from the arcing burn. The charging sound of that laser was going to drive me crazy, but it also meant a lot of those machines surrounded us. Children cried and were barely hampered by the adults around us. Zach was moving around me as small scraps of wood and concrete fell on my head. I grabbed his collar and pushed him to the ground.
What?
What did Chief have to do with this? Start talking.
Chris!
Talk! You love to run your mouth about random shit that doesn't matter. Talk!
Zach's face was unfazed as it stared back at me, its emotional mask. That angered me more, but his lips moved as slow as time did.
Ask him yourself. Why do you think your lovely prophecy is right here with you? This was an ambush.
My fear became a reality, but when Alexander grabbed my shoulder, I remembered the ash that fell on my face and the cries of mayhem that controlled the narrative. I could not verify this, but I was going to take a chance. My fist released the shirt of Zach, and he grasped me as if I gave him life. I squeezed his hand with the strength of my resolve and pulled him up.
Alexander, get these people to the border of town. Take Zach with you.
but
I sent him a look that made it clear it was not up for discussion. We did not have the time for one anyway. They left and I was alone, with a bunch of machines shooting in Alexander's direction. I drew their attention by setting the gel on fire and creating a fiery wall. The splinters moved back while the constructors flew over me. Dust was my best friend as my clothes were coated in it from all the missed arms fire. It was like I was target practice for a bunch of children. Their munitions were always missing in action, but even kids get lucky sometimes. I prayed they stayed unlucky. Whether Alexander got there alive, whether I was not a fool for trusting Chief, so many guesses, and I was stuck in this ruined landscape, an old relic of the past. Death was inevitable too. I was supposed to die. It was the only way Alexander would live on to be great. They told me I tried so many times before and failed, yet here I was, trying again. Would I succeed this time, or would I fail? I hated failure. That's why I tried my best to avoid committing myself to anything. Why try and screw up? Yet with this boy, I tried. For some reason, I kept coming back to help him. Why? Maybe this was where I would succeed, or maybe I treasured the moments before failure. I could not be sure. But as long as he lived, I would try.
Chris, you always told me to never stop moving. Come on!
Why did Alexander sound so close? I turned around and confirmed that was Alexander. He was moving toward the wall of fire. I stared flabbergasted at the brazenness of this kid.
Didn't I tell you to get out of here?
Alexander harbored that crazy smile on his face. It never faltered, and he was determined to make sure I stayed the course. He said,
The constructors are following me. I don't want to put innocent people in danger.
He was right. The constructors were swarming over our heads and made their presence known with striking blasts of lasers hitting the ground around us. This was not a good situation. We needed a plan, and Alexander suggested an odd one.
The ridges. Let's use them.
Boy, I told you to run.
I replied.
Okay, then let me run. If they're following me, they'll be tripped up by the crowded tree line and rocks.
It was a simple but dangerous idea. No one would risk their life in front of those machines like that. Anyone that tried was 6 feet deep, for they lacked the dexterity. Except Alexander. He was probably a slippery enough lad to pull it off. Zach also had Alexander's mortar, since Alexander was not a good shot anyway. Alexander told Zach to stay on a hill and hit any constructor trying to escape this area. It sounded nice, at least in theory.
Those splinters don't have bad programming,
I reminded him. Alexander said,
If it's me, it'll work. These robots have no soul. They'll do anything to kill me.
The fact that he said that with a straight face showed he cared little about his life. He should, for he was that important. Alexander pointed above my head.
Go to that hill. Cover me.
You're insane.
You're right. I learned from the best.
I couldn't deny it, but he was right about that. Alexander ran off, and the splinters crawled behind him like moths to a flame. He was not wrong. The splinters followed him, and they tried not to get in each other's way, but the deeper he got into the forest, the harder it was for them not to hit each other with their lasers. The constructors were a lot more interesting as they tried to take out Alexander, only for the boy to slip under the splinters' legs and turn them into target practice. It was a masterpiece. This man took down 10 splinters without lifting a finger. I traveled up the hillside and saw a shape coming out of the pitted darkness of the cluster of trees. My hand hovered over my pistol. Zach stepped out and nodded his head at me.
Still here, old man?
You won't get rid of me that easy,
I replied. It was over for now anyway. That did not mean this quiet moment would last long. Once Alexander walked up to us, I had to ask,
Why'd you come back for me?
You're important to me. All of these people, their smiles, their warmness. You all have treated me so well, even though I'm so different from you.
I was not the soppy type, but I liked to hear that. Alexander was wrong, though. He was not that different. Alexander was just human, and I forgot what that meant for a long time. I said,
Well, you can't trust everybody, mate, but you can trust some people. Let's get out of here.
Right. Wherever you want to go.
Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's John. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you to all our official channel members. Your support means a lot to us. Craving another scary tale? Click that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.